Picture this: 146 BC. The air in Corinth, one of the world's most ancient and wealthy cities, is thick not with the scent of spices and commerce, but with the metallic tang of blood and the choking dust of pulverized marble. It's unnaturally quiet. The only sounds are the crackle of fires and the coarse laughter of soldiers gambling, their dice rolling across a priceless masterpiece of art they've ripped from a wall and thrown in the dirt. This isn't just a battle, it's an eradication. Official histories call it a consequence of war, but newly examined eyewitness accounts tell a different story. They whisper of a calculated, cold-blooded message being sent, written in the ashes of a civilization. What you're about to see is not the history you were taught. This is the forensic truth of how an empire brought a kingdom to its knees. And now please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. That scene of calculated, systematic annihilation in Corinth, that doesn't just happen. It isn't a random act of violence. It's the horrifying conclusion to a story that began decades earlier, a story of two worlds on an inevitable, catastrophic collision course. To understand the forensic evidence in the ashes of that city, you first have to understand the forces at play. On one side of the map, you have the Greek world. This is the cradle of everything we call Western civilization. It's the legacy of Alexander the Great, a world of marble statues that seem to breathe, of epic poetry, of earth-shattering philosophical debate. But look closer. By the 2nd century BC, this world is fractured, a collection of rival kingdoms led by squabbling, decadent kings. They are the heirs to a glorious past, but they are drowning in it, consumed by petty politics and internal rivalries, utterly blind to the storm gathering to the west. And what a storm it was! On the other side, there is Rome. Not a kingdom, but a republic. Young, hungry, and brutally efficient. This is not a culture of debate. It's a culture of discipline, forged in the fires of constant warfare. Rome was an organism built for one purpose: expansion. Every aspect of their society, from their laws to their roads, was designed to support the relentless march of their legions. They were pragmatic, unsentimental, and they saw the wealthy, divided Greek kingdoms not as a cultural treasure, but as a prize waiting to be taken. The Greeks believed their culture would conquer all. They never imagined it would be looted, sold, and systematically erased by an enemy that valued discipline over dialogue. This wasn't going to be a battle of ideas. It was going to be a battle of iron against marble. And before we can show you the blood on the battlefield, you need to see the terrifying, purpose-built machine that was coming for them. You need to understand the tools of this conquest. Piece by horrifying piece. So what was this machine, this Roman organism built for conquest? To understand its terrifying effectiveness, you have to look at it piece by piece, like a forensic investigator disassembling a weapon, and it starts with the tool in every soldier's hand. Forget the elegant, sweeping swords you see in movies. This is the Gladius hispaniensis. It's short, roughly 50 to 60 centimeters of hardened steel, and it is not a slashing weapon. It was designed for one thing: stabbing. Its tapered point was engineered to slip between ribs, to puncture organs, to create devastating internal wounds. Medical analysis of remains from Roman battle sites confirms its brutal purpose. This wasn't a dueling weapon. It was an instrument for systematic, close-quarters evisceration in the crush of a battle line. But Rome's engineering of terror didn't stop at the handheld. Their siege engines were marvels of physics and psychological warfare. We're not just talking about catapults flinging rocks. We're talking about the ballista, a giant crossbow so precise it could snipe individual soldiers from hundreds of yards away. Imagine the horror. Not the chaos of a random barrage, but the cold dread of being hunted, of knowing that an unseen engineer has calculated the trajectory to end your life. And sometimes, the most terrifying evidence is the smallest. Archaeologists have found the ammunition for Roman slings. Small, acorn-shaped projectiles made of lead. They were dense, heavy, and could be slung at over 100 miles per hour, capable of shattering bone. But when we look closer at these recently discovered artifacts, we find something truly chilling. Scratched into the lead are messages for the enemy. Taunts, insults, a general's name. This wasn't just warfare. It was psychological terror, delivered at the speed of a bullet. Now you've seen the blueprint, the sword designed for internal trauma, the siege weapons that kill with mathematical precision, and the bullets that carry mockery along with death. An arsenal of pure, calculated terror. The only question was, how would it hold up against the most legendary formation in the ancient world? The first major test was about to begin, and it would change the rules of war forever. That arsenal of calculated terror, that purpose-built machine, was now rolling towards Greece. And waiting for it was the single most dominant military formation of the age, the Macedonian phalanx. Picture it. A dense block of men, 16 ranks deep, bristling with a forest of 18-foot-long spears called sarissas. For centuries, it had been an unstoppable, impenetrable wall of death. Head-on, it was suicide to attack. But the Romans didn't fight head-on. Their legions weren't a solid wall. They were a flexible checkerboard of smaller, independent units called maniples. They could bend, absorb a charge, and flow like water around an obstacle. And at the Battle of Sinoskephalei in 197 BC, on the uneven, hilly terrain of central Greece, that flexibility would prove devastatingly lethal. As the two armies clashed, the rigid Macedonian phalanx struggled to keep its perfect formation on the broken ground. A gap opened up. It was small, maybe insignificant to the Macedonian commanders. But a Roman tribune, an officer whose name is lost to history, saw it. He didn't wait for orders. He took 20 maniples, about 2,000 men, and plunged them into the rear of the Macedonian line. What happened next was a slaughter. For the Macedonians, it was unthinkable. Their formation, invincible for centuries, was being butchered from the inside out. The long sarissas that were so deadly from the front were now useless, cumbersome pikes. The Roman legionaries swarmed into their unprotected backs, and you could hear it, the sound of thousands of small shields splintering, the screams of men trapped, unable to turn, and the sickening, the rhythmic work of the short Gladius. Stabbing and stabbing and stabbing. The invincible wall of spears collapsed into a terrified mob. The military question had been answered with brutal finality. The Roman way of war was superior. But with their enemy's army broken and bleeding on the field, a new question arose. What would the victors do now? The world held its breath, expecting a new tyrant. But Rome, in a move of pure political genius, was about to offer something no one ever expected: freedom. After the brutal efficiency of Sinoskephalei, with the phalanx broken and the Macedonian army shattered, the Greek world waited for the inevitable. They knew the script of conquest: a new king, new taxes, new garrisons. But Rome was about to prove it was a different kind of predator, a far more intelligent one. The setting was the Isthmian Games of 196 BC, a massive festival where Greeks from every city-state gathered. Picture the scene. A huge crowd, the air thick with anticipation. A Roman herald steps forward and a hush falls. He reads a proclamation from the Roman general, Titus Quinctius Flamininus. The words, when they finally register, are impossible. The Romans, the victors, declare all the Greek states to be free, ungarrisoned, and subject only to their own laws. The reaction, as the historian Plutarch tells it, was an explosion of pure joy so loud that birds flying overhead supposedly fell dead from the sky. The crowd surged forward, screaming Flamininus's name, trying to touch the hand of their savior. Can you imagine the celebration? The tears of joy? They had no idea they were cheering for their new masters. But the documents tell a darker story. This freedom was a masterstroke of propaganda. Hidden in the fine print of treaties and alliances was the new reality. Rome was now the ultimate arbiter of all Greek affairs. They would mediate disputes, approve foreign policy, and their friendship was not optional. This wasn't freedom, it was a gilded cage, and Rome held the key. They hadn't put a king on a throne. They had put a leash on an entire civilization. And this fragile, deceptive peace could never last. The proud, argumentative Greeks would inevitably test the boundaries of their cage, and Rome's patience was about to run out. The next time they sent the legions, it wouldn't be to offer freedom. It would be to deliver a final, bloody verdict. That final, bloody verdict came on June 22, 168 BC, on a plain near the town of Pydna. The rebellious Macedonians, chafing under Rome's freedom, had raised one last great army, one final phalanx to challenge the legions. The clash was short, brutal, and decisive, and the numbers passed down to us by ancient historians like Plutarch are frankly difficult to comprehend. They tell us that in less than an hour, over 20,000 Macedonian soldiers were cut down. Think about that for a moment. That's more than the entire capacity of a modern sports arena, annihilated in less time than it takes to watch an episode of a television show. It's a rate of killing so extreme it borders on the industrial. Eyewitness accounts, preserved by the historian Livy, describe the aftermath in chilling forensic detail. A nearby river, they said, ran red with so much blood that it was still crimson the next day. The fields were so thoroughly littered with corpses and broken weapons that the Roman soldiers could barely walk through them. This wasn't a battle. It was an industrial-scale slaughter. The Roman war machine, which we deconstructed earlier, the machine of stabbing gladii and precision-engineered artillery, was now operating at full horrific capacity. The last great Hellenistic army was gone, erased from the earth in a single afternoon of butchery. And with it, any real military threat to Roman domination in Greece was extinguished forever. But this is where the story takes an even darker turn. An enemy with an army must be defeated. But what does a power like Rome do to an enemy that is already broken? What happens when there is no one left to fight? You might think the violence would end, but you'd be wrong. Now, Rome no longer needed to pretend to be a liberator. The time for making examples had arrived, and they had a very specific city in mind to teach a lesson the world would never, ever forget. The lesson was to be taught at Corinth. For decades, Corinth had been the leader of the Achaean League, a federation of Greek city-states that engaged in a final, desperate, and frankly suicidal act of defiance against Roman authority. They insulted Roman envoys, stirred up anti-Roman sentiment, and took up arms. To the Roman Senate, this was not a war. It was an infestation that needed to be cleansed. The man they sent, the consul Lucius Mummius, was not given orders to negotiate, or to conquer, or even to punish. His orders, sanctioned by the state, were to erase, and the Greek historian Polybius, a man who had been taken to Rome as a hostage years earlier, was there to witness the result. He writes not with the detachment of a historian, but with the shell-shocked horror of a man watching his world burn. He describes scenes of such profound cultural vandalism they seem impossible. Roman soldiers, bored and flush with loot, playing dice on priceless paintings ripped from temple walls, masterpieces by the greatest artists of the age, tossed in the mud and used as gaming boards. But the horror went far beyond art. It was methodical. The Roman legions swept through the city, killing every man they found. The women and children, the entire surviving population of one of the world's great cultural and economic centers, were systematically rounded up and sold into slavery. The city was then set alight, and its walls were pulled down. This wasn't the chaotic rage of a battle. This was a cold-blooded, meticulously planned act of state-sponsored terror. The message was clear, and it was broadcast in smoke and screams across the entire Mediterranean world. This is what happens to the friends of our enemies. This is what happens when you defy Rome. The complete and total eradication of Corinth was meant to be the final word. A brutal exclamation point at the end of the Greek story. But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. It set a new, terrifying precedent for Roman behavior. And believe it or not, it gets worse. Because what would happen decades later when this new standard of brutality was unleashed on the most sacred city in the Hellenistic world, the home of democracy itself? The answer came 60 years later, in 87 BC. The target was Athens itself, the philosophical heart of the Greek world, which had made the fatal mistake of siding with one of Rome's enemies. And the Roman general sent to deliver the punishment, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, was an instrument of pure, unadulterated wrath. What he did to Athens makes the destruction of Corinth look almost merciful. He didn't just attack the city. He encircled it and waited. He put Athens under a siege so absolute, so suffocating, that the city began to eat itself alive. The accounts left by Plutarch are almost too disturbing to read. He describes a city completely unraveling. Food ran out. People began boiling leather sandals and the hides from old shields just for a sliver of sustenance. And then, the ultimate taboo. As the starvation became unbearable, Athenians turned on each other. The cradle of democracy became a charnel house of cannibalism. But the physical horror was not enough for Sulla. He needed to inflict a deep, psychological wound. Needing timber for his colossal siege engines, he made a chillingly deliberate choice. He ordered his men to cut down the sacred groves of the Academy, the legendary park where Plato himself had walked and taught for centuries. This wasn't a logistical decision. It was a symbolic act of desecration, a message that nothing, not even the foundations of Western thought, was sacred to Roman power. And we know this happened. We have the proof. Archaeologists digging in the Athenian Agora, the city's central marketplace, have identified a thick layer of ash and rubble from this exact period, a verifiable scar left in the earth by Sulla's fury. When the walls were finally breached, the slaughter was so immense that Plutarch claims the blood of the slain flowed out of the city gates. Sulla wasn't just conquering a city, he was trying to kill an idea. Now, a clear and undeniable pattern of escalating terror has emerged. From military victory to mass slaughter, from total erasure to symbolic desecration. But this raises the most disturbing question of all. How could a civilization commit such systematic atrocities and still write its own history as a story of law, justice, and glory? The answer lies in the records themselves. And the most damning evidence of all is not what they say, but what they deliberately leave out. This pattern of escalating terror, from the slaughter at Pydna to the desecration of Athens, is not something we have to guess at. We have the physical scars in the earth, the destruction layers that archaeologists can point to on a map. But when we turn to the written records, a different, more insidious kind of evidence emerges. To see it, you have to place the two main accounts side by side. On one hand, you have the Roman historian Livy. He writes with the booming confidence of the victor, a patriot telling the story of his nation's glorious and justified ascent. To him, the Greeks were treacherous, weak, and ultimately got what they deserved. The violence was always a regrettable but necessary response to provocation. Then, you have the Greek historian Polybius. He was an eyewitness to the destruction of Corinth, a hostage who lived in Rome, and he is our most important source. But you have to read him carefully. He's a man traumatized, trying to explain the terrifying efficiency of this new Roman power to his fellow Greeks. But he's also writing for a Roman audience. He can't openly condemn them. So instead of outrage, he offers philosophical reflections on the whims of fortune. He describes the horror, like soldiers using masterpieces as gambling tables, but frames it as a symptom of a lack of culture, not a deliberate policy of terror. And when you compare these accounts, the real picture emerges. The most shocking evidence isn't what's in the official records, it's what is deliberately left out. The Roman accounts are meticulous on logistics, the number of men, the tribute taken, the political outcomes. They are almost clinically silent on the sensory reality of what they did. The smell of the pyres, the sounds from the slave markets, the psychological trauma of the survivors, it's all missing. It is a sanitized, administrative report of conquest. And that silence is deafening. It's a conspiracy not of whispers, but of omission. They documented the results of their terror, but they systematically erased the experience of it. They didn't just conquer Greece, They conquered the historical memory of the crime. And this reveals the final, most terrifying aspect of their power. A blueprint that extends far beyond the ancient world. A haunting lesson on what it truly means to win. That conspiracy of silence, that deliberate erasure of suffering from the official record, reveals the true nature of the Roman victory. It wasn't ultimately a victory of swords and shields, nor was it the subjugation of a people. The final, and most total, conquest was the conquest of history itself. It is the ultimate expression of power. The ability to commit unspeakable acts of violence and then write the story of your own benevolence, to stand on the ashes of a city you have annihilated and declare yourself a civilizing force. And in doing so, Rome left behind a legacy far more potent and dangerous than its aqueducts or its laws. It left a blueprint, a three-pronged strategy for absolute domination that has been copied, consciously or not, by empires ever since. First, achieve overwhelming military superiority through discipline and technology. Second, use that superiority to engage in calculated acts of psychological terror so extreme that they break the enemy's will to resist. And third, and most importantly, control the narrative. Censor the horror, omit the suffering, and write your own version of events into the permanent record. Rome gave us laws, roads, and architecture, but the evidence shows they also left a blueprint for empire. A chillingly effective manual on how to break a people's spirit. And one must ask, has that manual ever truly gone out of print?